Welcome back to HEDx, everybody. It still gives me a buzz to say that in the middle of that bit of music after 163 episodes. But this is our third major session of our conference here today, and I hope everyone's had a good break and good conversations and something decent to eat over that lunch break. There's lots of things to reflect upon from this morning's two sessions and lots of things to look forward to in the two groups of fireside chats and panels that we have in front of us, along with another report on some voice from students out there, which has been a topic being raised through this morning in the sessions that we have in front of us for the rest of today. But my job for this part of the day is to get out of the way as soon as possible and to allow you to hear from and engage with these three wonderful people on the stage. We are returning to Dan Cockrell's observation of how typical it is to have at least one American voice on the stage every time, but we also have voices from other parts of Australia and from a diverse set of perspectives of different universities trying to grapple with common challenges of how we support our students to succeed, how we prioritise that as a mission of our universities, and how we use leadership and culture and technology to bring that change about. So I'm going to say little more than that. I'm really looking forward to this session along with you. Slido is open, and Kelly and Marcia are going to help me jump up with a question after 25 minutes or so if there's one that we should add to what Veronica does with Tim and George. But for now, it's all in the hands of Veronica, Tim and George. Please make them welcome.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I think previous speakers have spoken about the admission of having an American voice. I can promise you I have the best American voice on my panel today and the best Australian voice on my panel today. In fact, I feel like we went an Australian and an American and a New Zealander walked into a bar. We sat down and decided to actually talk about getting stuff done, insert other word, but getting stuff done. And that's what we're going to talk about in terms of student success here. Hey, can I just acknowledge firstly the lands in which we meet and the tapestry of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who have contributed to the voice of higher education and continue to. I'd also like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are here in person and online as well. From my part of the motu in Samoa, talofa to you. I'd also like to acknowledge Martin from HEDx, who I've only known for all but 2 weeks, but I get more emails from Martin than I do my own boss. I'm slightly confused who I actually report to, and he's convinced me that I'm his BFF, and so he very happily voluntold me to do this session, which I accept. And hey, look, can I just say a very warm Pacific greetings to you all. And I say that because I've come from New Zealand, where I want to remind Australia that you belong to the Pacific, one of the largest oceans in the whole world, and the commonality of that ocean is what connects us. And one of the things we like to talk about is that our commitment to the region and bettering is absolutely the thing that connects us, and certainly what connects me to the two powerhouse of speakers I've got here on the stage. I am Veronica Pritchard, for those of you I haven't met. I'm new to your sector, only 6 months in from the higher ed space in New Zealand, and I work at the University of Queensland, where we're leading out the Queensland Commitment, which is our pledge to making education accessible for everyone here in Queensland and beyond. Joining me today is Dr. Tim Renick on my right and Professor George Williams. And if I'd say there are names who are at the vanguard of student success, I would say these two here. You cannot get any better than that. We made a pact before we came up that we would be rebellious, that we would talk about the things that we are actually doing, and that's hopefully the promise that I intend to keep with you both. Now, I'm going to start with connecting the past and present of New Zealand and beyond with Tim. So in Australia, many of you are starting to catch on to who Tim Renick and the story of Georgia State is, and the transformation that has happened abroad and overseas. But I might just say, from the rivalry that exists between Australia and New Zealand, that 6 years ago New Zealand discovered Dr. Tim Renick. And we've had him with us for about 6 to 7 years. So you've got about a 6 to 7 year mark ahead of New Zealand before you're about to catch up. But I wanted to start there and kind of internationally with Tim, because he's seen so much of this world and so much of what they've done in Georgia State, and certainly what we did in New Zealand around student success. And so I thought we could start off, Tim, if you could reflect on the experience that has shaped and continued to shape the story around Georgia State, and introduce us as to why student success continues to be relevant then as it is now.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. And as the requisite American on the panel, I should make clear on behalf of all my Americans, we are not here because you need to import our expertise. We're here because we need to escape our home country. And so thank you for providing a refuge from the craziness. Much appreciated. So what I'll start by saying is, it's never been a surprise or a mystery what we need to do in universities to support students. They need personalized, timely attention at scale. The problem has been for much of the sector, certainly for Georgia State, which is 53,000 students, 80% of whom self-identify as coming from underserved backgrounds. They're low-income, first-generation, mostly African-American and Hispanic students we enroll. You know, we knew what they needed. We knew how we were deficient. These are students who need help. They were leaving with problems that could be resolved, but nobody knew about the problems before the students left. They were leaving because of financial difficulties. We could have helped in many cases, but nobody had the information and initiative. What has happened, though, is that we have, over the last decade, with the help of data and technology, and yes, we're going to talk about AI on this panel as well, and Georgia State has been using it for our students since 2016, found efficient ways to deliver personalized attention to students at scale. We can use technology to help our staff do what they have always wanted to do: identify a problem when it's first happening, reach out and scale in a personalized and effective fashion. And so my reaction to your question, Veronica, is to start by saying there is much in common between Georgia State, New Zealand, what we see in Australia as well. These systems were designed, these universities were designed to serve mostly middle and especially upper income students who had parents who were going to watch and guide their process, who had relatives who would fill in financial gaps if there were problems and so forth. Those are not the students we're serving at Georgia State. They're not the students you were serving across your campuses in New Zealand. They're not the students that primarily many of you in this room are serving. So we have to adapt. And the great news is there are all these new tools and approaches that allow us to do so for a reasonable cost that allows us then to make a transformative difference. Georgia State is graduating every year 3,500 more students than we were a decade ago, and we've moved from an institution that was segregated, whites only in the 1960s, to the institution that is now graduating the most black students in the United States. So these kind of transformations can occur, and they can occur over a relatively short period of time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. And I think, Georgia, if we shift the lens now to Australia, and having heard about New Zealand and a bit of obviously what's overseas, I wonder if you might be able to share what's top of mind for you as we navigate the current sector reform here in Australia, the Accord, and a number of priorities that are driving our sector. And obviously we'll hear a little bit about WSU, but what kind of keeps you up at night around student success here in Australia?
Yeah, top of mind for me, I think as a society we're too often failing our young people. And so just forget unis for a moment. I think there is so much stacked up against young people today. It could be housing, it could be climate, you name it. I think that we are doing a very poor job often when it comes to supporting the next generation of people. I think it's also fair to say too often as a university sector we are failing young people. And we see that every student who wanted to stay at university but is unable to do so, well, there's a reason for that. And sadly, too often the reason is a university has made study too hard and we've failed to understand the needs of that student. Or we've put barriers in their way to continuing in study. Of course, there are many more as well, and many of those are external societal pressures. As I've said at our uni previously, 1 in 2 of our students have reported food insecurity. So at our university, it's often as basic as, I need the food to continue study. But it says a lot to me and worries me deeply that we live in a society, a very rich country, where the reality is for many students that study is poverty. It's actually not easy for those students to study for 3 years on a reasonable income, and I think something has gone very wrong. And it's not just for the students, it's for our larger community, because those are the students ultimately who build social cohesion. They're the students who build a sense of the community and the moving forward in the powerful, important ways we want to do. And by failing those students, I worry about our future as a country. So uni's right, can make a difference, and that's why I'm really passionate about higher education. But I think we need to do more in doubling down on students and give them the experience that really is the number one thing in our mission, that is their success.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And I think we might just dig into the work that you do now, Tim, around the National Institute on Student Success. And I wonder if you can share with us the kinds of challenges or areas of focus that continue to emerge consistently across the institutions that you're working with. And in particular, your story has been around the use of data, evidence, and analytics being used or underused to support student success. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let me build upon George's observation. He mentioned that sometimes it's too difficult. What we found at Georgia State, and I want to make this very clear, is the difficulty we need to help students overcome is not the difficulty of the academic work that's expected of them. There is no proposal on this stage for lowering expectations and standards academically. It's appreciating the way that our institutions are part of the problem, that we create administrative structures, we create all kinds of bureaucracy that are designed in some instances to help students, to be frank, a lot of times designed to make life more convenient for us. But if you actually examine the data, are the very reasons students are leaving our universities with no degree. So when we talked about using data at Georgia State, one of the first things we did with better data teams and diagnostics is put the mirror to ourselves and ask, how are we contributing to the dropout rates of our students? What we found was, quite frankly, horrifying, very disturbing, because we found in so many ways, as George just suggested, we were failing our students, not in their classes, but in the way that we had structured the university experience. This has started prior to the first enrollment. We had huge problems with students never making it to the first day of university because they couldn't get through the bureaucracy, all the transcripts and deposits and applications and placement exams and immunization requirements and so forth. And what was particularly disturbing is every time we looked at the data, whatever the problem was, whatever the obstacle was, it disproportionately negatively impacts students from first-gen low-income backgrounds. So we were not only the author of student attrition, we were the author of some of the equity gaps we were lamenting and blaming on others. Oh, isn't it terrible that the secondary sector is not, preparing the students more equally and so forth. So what we began to do is understand the way we as a university were complicit in the dropout rates of our students, not because that's the only reason students drop out, but because it's the reason we have the most control over, right? We have the ability to change the way we admit, communicate, register, advise, support our students, and we can do that at scale. And so, one of the things we began doing, this is now 12 years ago, is tracking students for common risk factors. We found that a student who's withdrawing from or dropping a course in the middle of the semester is at high risk of dropping out of university entirely. But when we looked at the mirror, we found we weren't doing anything with those students. We should have been reaching out aggressively the day that they're requesting to drop the class or to leave the course, but we weren't doing so. We found far more nuanced things. At Georgia State, for instance, if you take a course in biochemistry and calculus the same semester, your chances are 20% lower of getting passing grades in both classes as if you take the courses in succession. What we found, it didn't matter what succession. You could do one before the other or the other way around. But the students, again, no student knew that, but mostly first-generation low-income students certainly aren't going to know that. So we began saying, okay, now through registration, we'll look for students who sign up for those classes. We won't prevent them from taking the classes, but we're going to give them the information they need to succeed. Do you know that if you take these courses over the course of different terms and so forth, your chances of graduating are much higher? Do that over and over again. We're doing it over 100,000 times every year, where we're using the data to proactively give students advice that we never gave them before. Our graduation rates are up by 25 percentage points.
Awesome. And George, as you listen to that, to what Tim has just shared, how does that relate to what's happening at WSU and the work that you're doing, and the wonderful work that you're doing for students, both for communities and families alike?
Well, and we're very much at the beginning of the reform agenda, and we've got a few years to catch up to New Zealand, for example, in this area. And I think the challenge for me as a university leader is, what does it actually mean to have a university that makes decisions with the student at the heart of it? And as a sector, we often talk about student-centric universities, but what does it actually mean? And for me, that comes to basic things like timetabling. What does actually a timetabling system mean where you are serving student needs as opposed to a range of other factors? Another one is just campus utilisation. At our own university, we found that students couldn't get access to rooms for clubs and things. It caused other problems. We've changed that to actually say, let's open it up to students. And suddenly we're seeing more students using our campuses, clubs growing, and so good positive outcomes. So it's actually changing the starting point of decision making, and it leads to quite significant shifts, sometimes inconvenient for other things, sometimes more expensive, but important nonetheless. And for us, it's clearly a data-driven approach is part of it, but it's also the qualitative as well. It's about engagement with students, and that's been a big effort for us. And as I said at HEDx in Brisbane, part of it is using social media. We're deliberate about that. That's where we need to reach our students. We can't assume the students will come to us. In fact, they don't. They don't even read their emails most of the time, as we know. But I did another TikTok live session last week. You turn up, you don't tell the students, you just do it. And we got 1,200 students with us for half an hour, turned up just there and then, 200 questions, ranging from which sporting team to enrol in, or I've got this difficulty with the subject, but I'm too afraid to ask someone. And it's interesting that with this current body of students, they'll be quite frank on social media to the world, but not frank one-to-one. It's just a different generational engagement, but we'll do that very regularly with me and others, answer queries en masse, and it's working in terms of increasing engagement. And as I walk around campus, I very often have students coming up and saying hello and asking questions because they've seen the TikTok engagement. I did say last time in Brisbane that it did have that negative effect, or positive actually. My daughter wouldn't use TikTok anymore. And I can report that has changed. Last time she said, when I went on TikTok, she said that you're lame and a try hard. And she said, there's no way I'm on any platform you're on. As a father, and Anthony Albanese, this is the way to get young people. You don't need to ban it for under 16s. But my daughter, it has actually changed with her, and she's been watching these things. And now she says, you're still lame. But she said, as a 14-year-old, I watched this and it says your university cares about students. And she said that was the key message that was coming through. And that's the engagement that feeds into the data, absolutely data-driven, but connection. Connection, purpose, belonging, and for us, you've just got to be where the students are. And as uncomfortable as it is, I can't tell you how many micro-humiliations I've suffered. There are many, many, I assure you. I'm so out of my comfort zone, so badly out of my comfort zone. But, as leaders and as a community, we've got to get out of our comfort zone, essentially, and go to students, listen with humility, and then on the basis of those, we act. We make changes. This is the problem for clubs and societies. This is it. Often small things, incremental change. And I think with the great work that we hear from Georgia State, they're the two things we want to put together.
And I'll just mention briefly that when we talk about listening to students, it's not a separate issue than getting the data right. Because what you see in the data is all kinds of insights from students who would never raise their hand and actually talk about these issues. I mean, just the example I gave of, students signing up for 2 courses that are a toxic combination the same semester. We learned that through the data. It is giving voice to what students are experiencing. So yes, it's important to talk to students in the traditional way. It's also important to look at the data because you learn all kinds of things about them that they may not be able to articulate or not willing to articulate.
And I think it's very cool that you're on TikTok, George, so, so keep going. We're hot off the press, Tim, from your 3-day, what we're calling the Taylor Swift Australia worldwide tour, where you started at UQ. You'll then go on with the cool collaboration that we've got with online education services today and tomorrow, and then finish off with George at WSU. One of the things that we heard yesterday, when I look at you both, you're both leaders in your own right, is that often the culture that that comes with having to change institutions, your staff, your people that believe in you, and you have such big portfolios where you have the ability to drive change from your level. But often it's the bottom up too that we need to also be looking at. I guess I come to you as leaders around what your core message is about those who want to get serious about student success to their staff from the bottom up in your capacity as leaders. So if you don't mind, Tim, I'll go to you and then to yourself, George.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Veronica, that it takes both pieces of the puzzle, that you do need leadership to step in places. I now run an institute, a nonprofit, that's working with over 100 American universities, and one of the things that we've seen as absolutely essential is contracting with the university leadership, the president at U.S. universities, and then by contract requiring them to sit for a 90-minute meeting of findings and so forth after the first 6 months, because they're going to need to do some things. They're going to need to pull some levers. But what we also need to do at the same time is empower the practitioners to be able to understand the data better. A chronic problem in the States, in New Zealand, in Australia is our staff do not have the actionable data they need on a day-to-day basis. The simple example of a student withdrawing or dropping a course in the middle of the term. You know, there's a process for getting that bit of information to somebody who can act on it, not 3 weeks later and certainly not 3 terms later, but the day it's happening. And many of our staff are frustrated by the fact that our universities are not effective in doing that. So we need to think about ways that we can empower staff to use the data and technology that is going to make their jobs much more effective and ultimately impact these student outcomes.
So at my level, I suppose the 3 most impactful things I've done since I've been in the job to answer that question. The first is the TikTok. It's actually going where the students are and learning and understanding more about their needs and preferences in a way I just didn't get. I didn't understand. I thought I could see the world through my own eyes, if you like, as a student in the 80s and 90s. So I think that was impactful as a leader. The second thing was spending time in our Student Services Hub. So actually going there, answering queries, sitting with people as students came in. And that really opened my eyes to the barriers the students are facing. And also the barriers our poor staff face. They're brilliant. They're dedicated. They care. But guess what? Most of their job is helping students navigate a system that doesn't work. Computer says, no, I have to ring someone up in order to get that person's help to navigate something that frankly should be straightforward and easy and should be an app on their phone. And so when you've got brilliant, talented people, but they're held back from doing the human work they should do as opposed to an assistant to navigate a computer system, that really opened my eyes as well. And for me, particularly with AI, the opportunity is how do we get them to do the system bit with AI and then free these people up to do the human stuff they're brilliant at, what they don't have time for at the moment. And the third thing that was very impactful, again, really just getting to the coalface, was volunteering and spending time at our food pantry, where in Welcome Week we had a pop-up pantry on our Parramatta South campus. I wondered how busy it would be. I got there, the queue was out the door. It went for a couple of hours, non-stop, of people coming to get the rice, oats and staples, handing out food and asking, why are you here? And those stories were really powerful in helping me understand the determination and aspiration of these people, but equally how difficult it was. And again, that's what keeps me up at night, the fact that we should not be making study so hard. And we are in the food and education business, but to be frank, we shouldn't have to be. You know, you shouldn't be going short of meals to study, but that is the truth of it at the moment. And so those 3 experiences really are 3 key things that will inform my leadership, my decision making. And so I suppose you ask about what leaders to do, I'd say get to the coalface. You know, listen, engage directly, and I will teach later. I'm doing a couple of classes as well because I need to see the classroom experience and navigate some of the systems to go with that as well. And I think if you've got leaders engaged in that way, and in our case we have problems we need to fix, well, you know, I'm highly motivated as a result because it's impacted me directly.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And I think when I listen to you both, you spend a lot of time in the institution looking at all the things you're trying to fix. Sometimes we don't look up enough to look at how the impact on communities are and why it is important for us to get this right. I know you've both touched on it in different ways, but I guess the question to you is, what does success look like and why is it important to get it right for our communities that we serve? I'll go to you, George, and then to yourself, Tim.
Yeah, what does success look like? I suppose to be a bit provocative and probably a bit frank, I'm not sure it's the Accord anymore. I don't know where the Accord's gone. I mean, that's the blueprint for determining where we head as a sector. But for me, the Accord was a document of great promise. But, I mean, what is it delivering for students at the moment? Where's needs-based funding? Where's managed growth? We're a couple of years late on those things. Instead, we've got international student caps. And as much as I've talked about domestic students, it is frankly shameful what we are doing to international students. And the distress, anxiousness, mental health issues I am seeing from international students having paid a non-refundable $1,600 fee and stuck in a visa processing queue with no knowledge as to when they will emerge, it is a dreadful thing for our nation to be doing. And, you know, that's the policy settings. And frankly, we've gone backwards over the last couple of years in some of these things. So the Accord's got great promise, but I think we have to focus as leaders and as universities on what we can do. And ultimately, success for me, I measure in pretty simple ways. Our bottom line isn't dollars, it's graduation. So success is going to graduation, watching the happy, amazed students going up to receive their degree. 2/3 are first in family at our university. That's success, and more of that, essentially. The more of that, the better.
Yeah, I think all of us in this room are very fortunate that we get to do something on a day-to-day basis that has meaning, that has moral purpose. I unabashedly, to my faculty and to my partner institutions, talk about the moral component of what we do. It's not ethically acceptable to bring students to our campuses and have them leave because of things that we are doing wrong and that are in our control. And we have to admit the fact that we are part of the problem, that we can do better. And when we put our minds to it, it can have transformative impacts. I promised I'd say a little bit about AI. We were having trouble, for instance, with the students before they arrived on campus because they had graduated from their secondary programs but weren't yet at the university. Many of them were not making it to the first day of class, as I indicated. That was 2016 where we began to use AI at scale to communicate with our students. It was available 24/7. It could answer questions. We created a chatbot that was AI enabled to answer these questions. What it told us was, in many ways, how wrong many of our processes were. From the very first couple months, the use of the chatbot was heavier at 12 midnight than 9 in the morning. We were wrong about our business practices, right? A lot of our students are working students. They don't have time to get their issues resolved at 9 in the morning. They're getting home from work or putting the kids to bed at 11 o'clock, 10, and that's when they're dealing with these issues. We also had, to a point that George mentioned a little earlier, multiple students tell us when we did focus groups that they asked the chatbot questions they wouldn't have asked a human being. You know, if you're a first-gen student already concerned about whether you fit in, the last thing you want to do is go to some stranger and say, I can't fill out my financial aid form because I don't have access to my biological father and family taxes and things along those lines. So what we need to understand is what's at stake here is the future of these students, and we are in many cases the obstacle between them and success. We blame them, but in many cases we need to put the mirror on ourselves.
Thank you. And look, to close out our session, I guess my last question to you both is, what words of wisdom would you offer all of us as we strive to lead for impact, not just within our own institutions, but across the Australian sector more broadly? Go for it, George.
Oh, sure, words of wisdom. I mean, that's a bit rich coming from me. I've only been in the job for 7 months, so I wouldn't pretend to have that, but I suppose all I can do is, from my experience, is, you listen, you act, and I think the action is the important bit, and for me, you act within a frame where it actually is based upon student need. And when it comes to our mission at Western Sydney University, that means doubling down on mission. And a lot of problems in the sector at the moment, a lot of controversy, but for us it's simple. We're here for student success, impactful research in Western Sydney as our region. That's it. Do that and stick to that, and we think we'll be fine. And I think some of the other noise goes away for us because in the end, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, over the last decade, I've visited more than 500 universities in the US, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and so forth. My advice is don't use the excuse of waiting to act, that something else needs to happen before you begin to make improvements. That's the most common thing I hear is, yes, we understand we need to do this better, but we're waiting for this new technology to arrive. We're waiting for this new position to be filled. We're waiting for this new government policy to be clarified and so forth. And the reality is Georgia State made the transformation it did under very difficult circumstances. We're in a state where there's been a large disinvestment in higher education. We've had to operate under some of the anti-DEI policies that now are national at the state level for much of the last decade and so forth. We have had a student body that was coming in increasingly underserved, doubled the number of low-income students we enroll over the last decade. If we had been sitting there waiting for the external factors to align so that we could, move forward, we would literally have about 30,000 students who now have university degrees who wouldn't have had university degrees. So, recognize that there are positive things we can do to better support our students at scale tomorrow. They may not be perfect, but if they're better tomorrow than they are today, you're moving the needle in the right direction and you've done your job well.
Awesome, and thank you to you both. Can I just say Tim continues his time here in Australia up at WSU, where there will be a public session tomorrow. If you're interested, Alfia, who's just going to wave, is over there, which you can register to hear more. Otherwise, from your favourite Australian, the most popular American, and your newly adopted New Zealand friend, thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And before our panel leaves, there are a couple of questions that have bubbled up on Slido that we might just put them to. There were more than a couple, but you somehow managed to anticipate one or two of them, Veronica. Before I sent you the email, I don't know how you did that, but some that didn't get picked up by whatever process was going on there included some issues around the barriers and how we prepare our staff within universities to help us with this cultural shift, and particularly how we prepare them to embrace AI in providing support to students and what support we offer to the staff themselves in doing that. Is that something that either of you have encountered, or any of the three of you have encountered in the experiences that you have in your universities and overcome?
Yeah, yes, it certainly comes up a lot, and it's often true within the university sector in Australia. Technological literacy is not high. It's fair to say. So there's often a fairly low base to come off, but then again, that's a big opportunity as well. And I think in terms of the pitch at our university, we've talked earlier in the day about AI-first universities. Well, for us, that's completely wrong. It's about student-first universities, and then what are the tools we're going to use to harness to actually improve that experience, and then the research and the community outcomes. So it's speaking the language of staff, and at our university, I'm so fortunate. I've never worked at an organisation with such passion and commitment to students and community as I have at Western Sydney University. It's our secret power. So for me, my job is to harness it, is to actually help people on the journey they're already on. AI is a great tool for that, but it's just a tool. And I think true to mission is the way at our place that we get things done.
Yeah, and I'll say quickly that from this very first discussion this morning from Paul LeBlanc in the first panel, we heard the claim that the issue in front of us now is not AI or not AI. AI is there, it's happening, our students are using it, and so forth. And I wouldn't say our view has been at Georgia State to prepare our staff, it's equip our staff. Equip our staff at what they need in order to use various tools effectively. There was no pushback in 2016 when we began using AI at scale for communication because, as George was just saying, there was a very clear purpose for it. We were overwhelmed with emails and questions from students. Sometimes it was taking us 10 days to respond. And what the AI allowed us to do is turn those 10 days into, in some cases, under 10 seconds, where the student would put a question in and immediately get a response. It wasn't there a philosophical debate about AI. It was recognizing we have an obligation to deliver this personalized attention to our students, and this was a way to do so more effectively.
Fantastic. Do you have anything to add, Veronica?
I was going to say the experts have said, look, the only thing I might just add is, having come from New Zealand, where I worked in the most deprived part of Auckland, in South Auckland, where poverty is at its highest, we were still dealing with the digital divide. So just trying to get students data and laptops and those sorts of devices was still as basic as it got. And so some of the ethics around the use of AI and just the barriers to that was probably still where we were. So that's the only thing I'd offer.
I'm delighted to say the clock's down to 4 seconds left for this fireside chat. We're bang on schedule. Please join me in thanking our 3 fireside chat participants.